Okay, this is the first video in a series about National Geographic History, the magazine. So I'll just take an article from the magazine from time to time, I'll read it, and then I'll give you some questions you can think about for discussion later. So this article is The King's Ivory, Benin Salt Cellar. I just want to show you this article from Khan Academy, which is really great. Benin and the Portuguese. So this is very similar. It talks about the Portuguese traders who interacted with the kingdom in Benin, which is now modern day Nigeria. So going back here, the powerful king, or Oba, of Benin granted Portuguese traders special access to the artistry of the ivory salt cellars created by the craftsmen of his court. Carved from an elephant tusk, an intricate ivory salt cellar stands only 10 inches high, but its myriad details make a massive impact. Four European males, two richly attired men and their servants, support a receptacle for salt, which is in turn crowned by a ship. Housed today in Paris, France's Quai Branly Museum, the salt cellar was fashioned around the 16th century by the highly trained artisans in Africa's ancient kingdom of Benin, in what is modern Nigeria. According to Kathy Kurnow, Associate Professor of African Art History at Cleveland State University, salt cellars like this one were made by a small group of artists, 6 or 7 men, who belonged to a hereditary, male-only guild of ivory carvers. Their highly sought skills were passed down through the generations through demanding apprenticeships. Growing up watching their elders' techniques gave them a facility with ivory that surpassed that of contemporary European artists who had less access to this material, Kurnow said. So I'll just go through that a little bit. These salt cellars, this is what they're called, a salt cellar. Basically, it just holds salt. Now, salt in these days was a really important commodity. It was used in so many different things, and there are some great books about the history of salt. And the Portuguese had a relationship with the kingdom in Benin, so they were able to go in and trade with them and get materials from them, which was really good for the Portuguese. So let's go in here. It's 10 inches high, but its myriad details make a massive impact. So this salt cellar, which holds salt, it's only 10 inches high, but it has a myriad. Let's go back there. It's myriad details. That just means it's numerous details. A lot of really great details here, as you can see. They make a massive impact. It's really noticeable. So they were fashioned around the 16th century. They were made in the 1500s by highly trained artisans, which are people who have a craft that they can do. They make shoes, or they make salt cellars, they make art, and they were part of a hereditary group. So basically, it would be men in the same family. Their father would pass down the skills to them, and then they would pass it down to their children. And it was men only, and they would have these demanding apprenticeships. So an apprenticeship is where you go and you learn from some master or an elder. So you watch the elder with his techniques. Watching their elders' techniques gave them a facility with ivory. It gave them a facility with ivory. So it gave them a real understanding of how to work with ivory. So that's a great phrase. Gave them a facility with ivory. So it gave them a good understanding. It gave them the kind of ability to work with ivory. And it surpassed that of contemporary European artists. It was better than European artists because they didn't have access to this material. Okay, so Hidden chambers for salt are skillfully disguised by the Benin artisans' detailed craftsmanship. So all these things are just holders for salt, and they're really highly decorated and really intricate. In 1485, Portuguese traders became the first Europeans to contact the Kingdom of Benin, one of the oldest and most highly developed states in West Africa. Benin's kings were known as Obas, who held court at Edo, later called Benin City, located about 200 miles east of modern Nigeria's largest city, Lagos. In the 15th and 16th centuries, an Oba's relationship with the Portuguese centered on trade. The Portuguese traded firearms, cloth, cowrie shells, coral, and alcohol for slaves, leopard skins, and pepper. Among the goods the Portuguese also sought were beautiful carved items of ivory made by Benin's artisans. The Oba allowed his craftsmen to fulfill Portuguese requests for ivory souvenirs in the form of carved saltcellars, spoons, and hunting horns. The first pieces of African art produced for sale abroad as exotic objects. This saltcellar rite is one of four similar ivory pieces that are held in different collections around the world, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the British Museum, as exemplary pieces that highlight the skill and workmanship of Benin's artists. Okay, so 1485, Portuguese traders come to Benin. Now, there's a long history of the Portuguese coming into Africa, not only Benin, but Congo as well, and not just doing trading, but also involved heavily in slavery and transporting slaves. And so that's definitely something to think about when you're reading this. So they were trading and getting these great things, but also this was kind of the beginning of the slave trade, an international slave trade. So the Portuguese traded firearms, cloth, cowrie shells, coral, and alcohol for slaves, leopard skins, and pepper. They were trading all these things, and the Oba would allow his craftsmen to give the Portuguese ivory souvenirs, because ivory, like today somewhat, it was still a really highly valued material, and they wanted to have ivory objects. And of course, ivory would come from an elephant's tusks, and we know that that's not something that people condone now, because it causes a lot of problems, and you're killing elephants just to get that material so that you can have some nice souvenir. So this was definitely happening back in those days. And let me just go over here. We have some examples of salt cellars. So crow's nest, a sailor peers from the crow's nest while another climbs up the rigging. The figures are not depicted to scale and appear larger than the boat. So that's a nice design. There's a crow's nest there. They're climbing up. That's where they look out. They're definitely bigger than the boat. It's not to scale, but that's okay. It's still very intricately designed. Really amazing. Caravel, the ship's design is medieval, nothing like the 15th century Portuguese ships. The round anchors are raised, suggesting the artist relied on an illustration. Okay. Then we have some Portuguese figures. Okay. And masters and servants. Okay. Costumes, the master's clothing and weapons get careful attention, reflecting their importance, from the hats and doublets to the embroidered stockings. No detail is ignored. Okay. So a question you could think about is maybe, what influence do you think the Portuguese had on these artisans from Benin? So before the Portuguese arrived, maybe they were making different things. And then when the Portuguese finally arrived, maybe their art changed, because definitely they had to start making art for these new people. They had to make salt cellars that represented the Portuguese. So how do you think the Portuguese influenced their artistic style. That would be a good question to think about. And then kind of the darker side. Um, these things are very beautiful, and yeah, it's nice. They trade all these things, but what is the other side of this? The Portuguese are coming in, they're trading, but they're also taking slaves. They're kind of dividing up land. They tried to colonize a lot of parts of Africa. So another question would be, um, and also they're getting these ivory souvenirs, so which is leading to poaching of elephants, killing of elephants just for the ivory. So another question you could think about is, what are the negative impacts of the Portuguese coming into Africa? And not only that, but what are the negative impacts of any country or big power coming into another country? And yes, doing trade, but then also getting involved in other things like killing animals and taking slaves. So what are the negative impacts of the Portuguese coming into Africa?